It is said that the gibbering fanatic known only as the Deacon was the first acolyte of Nurgle within the millions of human souls who served Mortarion and his warriors. If the stories are true, many decades before the eruption of the Horus Heresy, a lone chaplain of the Word-Bearers covertly passed a grimoire filled with scrawled incantations and hexes to a lowly urchin aboard one of the many ships in the Death Guard fleet. This seemingly insignificant action planted a small yet potent canker within the bowels of the 14th Legion. This rot would slowly but surely spread to the far reaches of the fleets, preparing countless mortals for the inevitable civil war that would split the Imperium in twain. Many years later, with the tome still chained to his waist, the Deacon walks the rusted halls of the Scythe's Edge with his disciples to heal, his dirge-caster ever-blasting memorized passages and prayers dedicated to the Lord of Decay. Hi there guys, welcome to today's edition, I suppose I could say, of my retrospective, I suppose. Now with this one, obviously it is not a member of the Astartes or 14th Legion or whichever, but this today I wanted to sort of cover. I had some really good comments on my video from yesterday, but I really wanted to cover a little bit more sort of fluff or background, I guess plot devices to some extent. So I had for years, in fact, really wanted to do a sort of late heresy or sort of mid to late heresy 14th Legion force, okay? And I started off, I think it was four and a half years ago now, in China. I made my first Terminator, which ended up being rolled into my first iteration of the Grave Wardens. So bloated leg, really corrupted, all this kind of stuff. But rather than having sort of pigeonholing myself, I suppose is the phrase, into purely being able to run a Siege of Terror era force, because obviously the background dictates that really the Death Guard only really fully turned to Nurgle en route to Terror, and Mortarion accepted sort of fealty to alleviate the suffering of his sons. He was a bit of a bastard, but he still cared for his men. I thought instead I'd try to have a different way to have the influences and gifts of Nurgle infiltrate a smaller part, a Splinter Fleet, if you will, of the 14th Legion, so I could play sort of unhindered. I could sort of just play whoever, whenever, and it would still kind of make sense. It wouldn't be totally out of join, out of whack, if you will. Now this chap is the Deacon. I wrote that little passage quite a while ago now, and this guy is how exactly Nurgle was able to get a foothold within this particular part of the fleet, okay, which is, as many of my followers will know, my Grand Company, or section of the Grand Company, is led by a chap called Grune Thrail, and before a few weeks ago I had started a sort of corrupted version of him. So he's been bested by Nurgle. Obviously, who is a single marine to overcome the whims of a chaos god, no less one of the pantheon, so the very famous and powerful four gods of chaos, or the most important four, I suppose. So he's been overcome, but how did these whispers enter the fleet in the first place? So this chap here, the Deacon, he was given a grimoire. You know, I've deliberately left it open to interpretation who precisely this chaplain may well have been, who gave him the book. And as this turntable comes round, you may well see here that you've got that fancy little book chained to his waist with the little 3 skulls on there, which is obviously very famous of Death Guard as a 40k emblem. But yeah, the power of the number 3 obviously is all there as well. So essentially this model is extremely old, 40-year-old resin. This is a legitimate model, but it's aged over time. This was, I don't know, released over 10 years ago maybe, and a very good friend of mine gifted this to me, and I got to work immediately on making him a little bit more unique and interesting, using a range of different parts to sort of bring him in line with the aesthetic of my militia force. So this guy is just, I believe, just a basic mook, but I may eventually make him a rogue psyker. He is on a 32mm base as well, so just I'll spruce that up as well, as I don't generally like using just plain bases if I can help it. So now this guy, he spread the word of Nurgle throughout the human elements of the fleet, and obviously humans in their weak ways, in their T3 mook ways, they are far more susceptible to the whispers of the Chaos Gods and the promises of power. So spread like wildfire within the human elements of the fleet. And obviously, though Death Guard, and certainly in a lot of the books, I know Flight of the Eisenstein is one, where the human serfs are treated to some extent with contempt by certain members of the Death Guard. I believe Ignatius Grulgor, being one of them, really holds them in very, very high contempt. So, but they still interact. These serfs will maintain a huge amount of the ship-to-ship tasks and requirements, and fulfill all manner of duties, either away from or together with members of the legionaries, essentially. So, if you're within proximity long enough with those that have been corrupted, and you also don't necessarily understand what chaos is, because obviously the Emperor had indeed lied to his sons, or at least not been very honest about the existence of the primordial annihilator, then they would have thought, oh, they're just a bit, these guys are a bit stinky and puffy, but nothing to really be worried about, especially considering from Barbarous, you've got pallid, bald men and women. I don't know if the women are bald, a bit of Sinead O'Connor, who knows, but I have an image of these very sort of gaunt, pallid Barbarousians or Barbarans, whatever it is, being turned into Marines, and those failures being sort of enveloped into the fleet in general. So there we go. So this guy spread it to the rest of the human crew, and the human crew there was enough presence, I suppose. Again, it's very much open to interpretation with regards to chaos and how it works exactly, but there was enough of a foothold for Nurgle to sort of start spreading to potentially Astartes. But I believe at the very beginning I actually had a warp translation with one of the ships called the Scythe's Edge, which is the flagship of this small Splinter Fleet. I'm trying to remember what particular designation or class it is, if I were to pop it over to Battlefleet Gothic or Heresy. I think I have mentioned it at some point or other, but it's probably going to be sort of like a Dominator class cruiser or something along those lines. Might upgrade it to a Grand Cruiser, maybe even a battleship potentially. So we'll see how that goes. But either way, warp translation, and this sneaky bugger, the Deacon, ends up turning off the Gellerfields, and obviously the Gellerfields are there to keep the screaming souls of the Immaterium away from the mortal crew of the Imperium starships. So obviously chaos ensued in more ways than one, and possession started taking place, and chaos was able to Nurgle was starting to sow his gifts among the legionary members of the crew of the Scythe's Edge, and then from there it all went to hell. So now in the story I have Grunthrail. He's a psyker. Obviously Mortarion despised psykers. He was one of the main sort of what would you say, one of the main dudes behind the Council of Nicaea, or the Trial of Magnus as it's also known, and he despised their use, obviously from his own personal experiences being brought up in the peaks of Barbarous by basically a witch, like a Xenos warlock, as it were. So he hated all that kind of crap. So he just folded the Librarius back into the rank and file. So Grunthrail, just by dint of his tactical acumen, was able to work his way up to becoming a praetor, or a captain of a grand company, as it were. And but he had enough sway with his psychic abilities to strike a bargain with Nurgle, or at least with one of the messengers of the plague god, the the grandfather, and he was able to keep his sort of standard form without decay. Like I mentioned earlier, this is no longer the case, and we'll get onto that in due course. But there we go. So this guy as a model, it's a Forge World. It's one of the, I don't know if it's called like a Herald of Nurgle, something along those lines. But you can see that I've added a couple of elements here, done a bit of sculpting as well. So we've already mentioned the book. There's plenty of Warhammer Fantasy kits and parts that have little books and things like this. I'm not sure if this one was originally from the Flagellants. I'm not sure if they actually have a book there, but I've just taken off an emblem from one of the Death Guard shoulder pads and added it on there as well. The head is from, I think there's one of the riders of the Glockin or something along those lines, but it's an Age of Sigmar piece, and I've just added that on, popped the cowl back on the top, and green stuffed that all together. You will be able to recognise the Green Stealer cult, Gene Stealer cult, sort of shoulder segment there, a little power pack and all this kind of stuff. I think this is an amazing way of jazzing up models, and a few of you will recognise this on some of my other bits and bobs in the militia force, which is slowly but steadily growing. Just a brass rod there to sort of strengthen and elongate the caster there as well. Bit of copper wire as a bit of wiring. Now the green plastic elements will be from the Poxwalker kit. So you've got that great choppy knife there, really duffed up. That'll be lovely to paint in a really rusty manner, with some sort of edge highlighting in silver. And then his left foot again from one of the Poxwalker, easy to build Poxwalkers, and the emblem of my militia, just to tie it in with Nurgle, the God of Decay, is a little fly. So you can see on his little, what are they called? His little pontiff hat. I don't know what it's called exactly. Answers in the comments, please. But I've added that little emblem there, which should be prevalent throughout the militia force, and should indeed be on every single model in that force as well, just as a sort of a marking, a mark of loyalty, if you will, or fealty, I guess is probably the greater word. And then finally, the little knife on his belt at the back is from, there's an Age of Sigmar Nurgle model. Again, apologies, I probably should have done a bit more prep with this video, but it's the chap pouring potion into this poor dude's face, into his mouth. So it's just from that kit. Resin, which resin? It's a fine cast, aka fail cast, but little elements like that I think really add to a model. So, and then the fine modelling chain, I think that you can find that on eBay. I think you just need to make sure it's 32 to 36 links per inch, I believe, that sort of scale or grading, if you will, just to make sure that it's in line. I think a lot of people tend to use modelling chain that's probably a little bit too big for what they're doing, what they're using it for, and it just looks out of sorts. So you've got to really go quite fine to make sure that it's in scale with the rest of the model itself. All right, so there we go. So this is the Deacon. I was asked by a couple of people as well the sort of thought processes I go through when it comes to making models. I don't sketch things out. I may have a rough idea of what works, but largely it'll be, if I'm away from my bits for a while, I will sort of consider. I'll look at images of particular components and go through my memory and mind to see if I think that would work on a particular model. Otherwise, I will just sit down with bits and I will try a few things out. And I would like to think that I have a fairly decent gauge or feeling as to how things work and if they work well in a composition for a model. So, but yeah, so again, comment if there's any particular models you want me to highlight. I will try to want to make it as varied as possible. So plenty of Death Guard, obviously, militia, potentially also Imperial Fists, and the Emperor's Children I started on fairly recently as well. So all sorts that are there. I just need to sort of keep myself proactive, as it were. Hopefully we'll be getting a CT scan fairly soon to assess the damage to my shoulder. It doesn't sound great. Had a chat with a consultant, but I won't bore you guys with that on here. If you are interested, just get in touch. But But there we go. So this is number 2 of my retrospective. Very early on militia model to accompany my Death Guard. And I think that when this guy is all painted up, he will really look the part. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please smash subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, comment if you will, and I'll see you on the other side. Cheerio.